As the California diggings yielded less and less wealth, gold fever was sparked again by the discovery of gold in the Colorado Rockies, Montana, Oregon, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and the Dakota Territory. Many of these gold sites lay on Indian territory, guaranteed by treaty with the United States. Nevertheless, Americans descended upon these sites and forcefully drove the Indians out. The often strained relations between American Indian tribes and the U.S. government were about to take a significant turn for the worse. The Sioux War of 1865 to 1867 broke out after the U.S. government announced its intention to build a road through the foothills of the Black Hills. The purpose was to connect new gold mining settlements to the east. The road-building project cut through sacred Indian grounds, including their primary area for hunting. A Sioux Indian chief named Red Cloud, who was generally on friendly terms with the U.S. government, warned that there would be resistance if the project went ahead. This sparked 2 years of continuous bloody warfare. In 1868, the Fort Laramie Treaty was created. The treaty gave the Indians an area called the Great Sioux Reservation, which encompassed half of present-day South Dakota, including the Black Hills.
The idea was to remove the Indians from areas where whites wanted to settle, and in return, the Indians would be given food rations and be recognized as independent negotiating powers with the United States because they had no rights as American citizens at that point in history.
Red Cloud accepted the terms of the agreement. His faction, his own small group of Sioux Indians, came to be called the Treaty Indians. Another faction of the Sioux, however, refused to make any concessions to the whites. Under the leadership of Sitting Bull, they were called the Non-Treaty Indians. The non-treaty faction included a famed Oglala Sioux warrior named Crazy Horse, who led Indian forces to ambush an entire command of soldiers outside a fort in Wyoming. The non-treaty Indians refused to stay on the Great Sioux Reservation. By the early 1870s, gold fever came to the Black Hills. Rumors spread quickly that there was gold in the Black Hills on the Great Sioux Reservation. Another round of armed conflict with the Indians lay just around the corner. In 1874, George Armstrong Custer led over 1,200 men on what was called a scientific expedition into the Black Hills to look for gold. Custer was known for his reckless bravery and harsh leadership style. When Custer's troops succeeded in finding gold, word got out, and miners streamed in to strike it rich in violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty. Custer sought to increase his fame in the Dakotas by fighting the Indians. The U.S. Army was supposed to remove any white trespassers from the reservation, but gold seekers soon overwhelmed them. Since Custer's sympathies were with the gold miners, he threatened to punish any Indians who resisted the miners. Before full-scale war broke out again with the Sioux Indians, the United States government tried to buy or lease the Black Hills from them. Sitting Bull's non-treaty Indians aggressively opposed the negotiations. The government demanded that these non-treaty Indians leave the hunting grounds. Sitting Bull refused.
They maintained that they had the right to maintain grounds that were sacred to them. The white man had no right on there, and therefore they promised to fight anybody that tried to put them off of their land.
In the meantime, the Treaty Indians continued to seek a peaceful settlement. The Treaty Indians demanded that the United States government supply substantial amounts of food and housing to them, but the government deemed the proposals too costly. General Philip Sheridan, a famous Civil War general, drew up a plan of attack. 3 separate columns of soldiers would enter the unceded territory from a different direction, and whichever one found Sitting Bull and his followers would destroy them. On June 25, 1876, Custer brought his troops into the valley of the Little Bighorn River and split his forces, hoping to surround Sitting Bull's faction. However, he didn't know that many treaty Indians came to join Sitting Bull and his non-treaty Indians to fight the whites, and their numbers swelled to 6,000. As Custer's troops rode down from a ridge into the valley, the Indians overwhelmed and killed them. The disaster at Little Bighorn caused the Americans to intensify their military campaign against the Indians. Eventually, with superior numbers and more advanced weaponry, the Americans won out. Sitting Bull refused to surrender. Instead, he escaped to Canada, refusing to give up his way of life. He vowed, "I will remain what I am until I die, a hunter. And when there are no buffalo or other game, I will send my children to hunt and live on prairie mice, for where an Indian is shut up in one place, his body becomes weak." After the defeat of the Sioux, the Americans restricted Indian tribes to smaller and smaller pieces of land in reservations. The surviving Indians lived in poverty. Their hunting grounds became almost barren, as their primary game, buffalo, were hunted to near extinction.
They were completely dependent on anything the United States government would grant them, whatever little that was. And it was not for many years that Indians enjoyed the same rights as citizens that the rest of the country did.
When Americans moved out west, they dreamed of attaining lives of ease.
Gold fever definitely infected the United States. It captured the imagination of everybody. People left by the thousands. In 1849, it's estimated that maybe upwards of 40,000 people left the Midwest and the East coming overland. Another 50 or 60,000 came by